Okay, so if you're making paper from home, you can use a stretcher starter as seen here, and you can buy it online at this point from AC Moore or Michaels or Dick Blick or a place like that. And just put the stretcher starters together. You'll have to buy 2 sets, as you see here in this photograph. And then you can staple down window screening, and that will be your mold for your mold and decal. The piece that does not get the window screening, that's called the decal. And the decal is the piece of the mold and decal set that allows for that kind of nice edge, that less than perfect edge that's so unique to handmade paper. So that's how I would start the process with this mold and decal. And I would use a simple Tupperware bin, as you see here, to pour the pulp into to form the sheets of paper. Using a basic kitchen blender, you can blend drawing paper, sketchbook paper, anything like that. I would avoid newsprint, newspaper. Printer paper like inkjet paper works okay, but it's not quite as good as sketching paper. You can even use some old stationery if it's blank and doesn't have ink on it, and you can use that to make your pulp. So you can soak the paper overnight, rip it up first so it absorbs plenty of water, and then you can blend it for 2 to 3 minutes on high in a blender. And then pour it into your Tupperware. You want the ratio to be a little more water to pulp. Obviously, the more pulp you have in the Tupperware, the thicker it's going to be, and you don't want it to be too thick. So I would say a little more water to pulp, or 50-50, but you can keep playing with that as you go along. Then dip the mold and decal into the Tupperware. Make sure that the screening is face up. I always tell the kids, you're bouncing on a trampoline, not swimming in a pool. But they will do it backwards once or twice, and it's not a big deal. You'll want to run the mold through like a kitchen sprayer to get the mold out or to get the pulp out. You want to try to keep your hands off of the mold and decal as much as possible. It's tempting to try to scoop up the pulp with your fingers, but it's actually better to spray it out with a kitchen sprayer. So once you pull the piece of the pulp from the Tupperware, I always rest it on the edge of the Tupperware, and then I remove the decal. So now all I have is the mold. And then when you flip it, I would put some newspaper down or something equivalent, and then just take an old t-shirt or a cotton pillowcase, and I'm just transferring the pulp onto what in my case it's a rag. It's like a cotton bartender's rag. It helps to have the rag a little bit damp when you transfer the pulp, which is, by the way, called couching, which the kids love, because the damp rag will adhere to the fibers a little better than a dry one. If it doesn't transfer, it's probably because you don't have enough pulp ratio. It's too thin, it doesn't want to transfer. In fact, when you pull it back, you may see some air bubbles. So just return the pulp to the Tupperware by just kind of smacking it back down onto the surface of the Tupperware. Again, try to avoid the temptation to pull it off with your fingers, because actually what you're doing is drying the pulp too much, and you're forming paper before it's ready to be formed paper. So just smack it back onto the surface and return it back to your Tupperware and try again. If this happens, you'll want to add more pulp to your Tupperware so that you don't run into that problem twice. And then once you've transferred it onto the cotton again, I used a rag. You can use maybe even a kitchen towel. Just make sure it's relatively cotton. You just release it from the mold. The newspaper will absorb a lot of the water, and then I let it dry, or as you're letting it dry, rather, I should say, I actually added some, leaves, dried leaves, and some fresh spring leaves, and I pushed it down into the paper with my hands. And then I put another sheet of the cotton rag on top of it and more newspaper. And then I put it under some weights, like you could use books are fine, or bricks or something like that. And after a few days, you want to keep changing the newspaper, changing the rag so that you keep a fresh, drier rag on top of it, even on the bottom. Just keep replacing them so you're slowly drying the paper. I then removed the plants, and taking watercolors, I can watercolor into where the plants left a impression in the paper. You don't have to do that with the plants and the impression, but it's a nice way for the kids to use the paper for watercolor painting. And then they have a nice sheet of stationery or artwork that they can use, paint on, and enjoy. So, by the way, you can stack the papers on top of each other once you've cooched them. So you can, if you put a piece of rag on top of the poured paper, you can just you can cooch another sheet on top of that and keep piling it up. And eventually just put the newspaper on either end, the top and the bottom of your pile, and then again the books or the bricks or something, so that you can slowly dry your paper. So I hope this helps, and I'm happy to help with your project. And if you'd like to learn more about my artwork, my handmade paper and pulp painting, you can visit my website at megblack.com. Thank you.